and appreciate is that our goal should be to prevent the collapse of our economy rather than figuring out how we can put it together after it crumbles. Okay, in other words, it is a lot easier to try to maintain the economy rather than putting it together after we have massive unemployment, hunger, and incredible stress on the part of the American people. And I think the most effective way to do that, simply stated, is to make sure that every worker in our country keeps receiving his or her paycheck. As some of you may know, in the last stimulus bill that was passed last week, Congress appropriated over $25 billion as part of that $2 trillion bill. Over $25 billion was appropriated in grants to the airline industry so that 2 million workers in that industry could continue to receive their full paycheck and benefits through September 30th. So let me repeat that, what we did for the airline industry. What we did is give them a large sum of money which goes directly to the 2 million workers in that industry who through the end of September will continue to receive their paychecks, whether they are working, some of them are, or whether they are not, most are not. And they will also continue to get their benefits. In other words, they have been made whole. And in my view, that is exactly what we must do for every worker in America. And I know people out there.
Rational actor. Rational, pragmatic actor. It's not a radical idea to say that the workers in the country, the people who make this country run, the people who provide the services, the people who do the labor, meaning everything that you know of within the context of your life and the way your life is pursued requires other human beings to either make that product, shop at those stores, provide that particular service, do that particular work, meaning those people make the society what it is. And in making the society what it is, when the society hit the skids, should those people not be made whole? What is the point of paying taxes if you don't have a government that responds to the needs of the population? Yes, Sanders is right. Pragmatic, rational actor. You allow those people to maintain their standard of living. You, in doing so, still continue to buy various products, buy their healthcare needs, pay their rents, etc., etc., etc. Meaning putting money to the people at the bottom flows eventually to the top in the sense of the things that they have to pay for, the things they have to buy in order to make themselves a life. That's rational response. That is not the response that is taking place, however. Hundreds of thousands of people have been infected in the United States. Thousands have lost their lives. I think we're up to 7,000 or 8,000. And the response of the president and the government itself has been woefully lacking. The Defense Production Act should have been used almost immediately. The quarantining or the very least shutting down the border should have been done relatively immediately. Even steps like ensuring that workers and people maintain their livelihoods and either going with policy that ensures that those people keep their jobs. The people at the airlines, they got laid off. The airlines that they gave that money to, billions of dollars, some of those airlines, at the very least one, started to lay off workers. You have to have entanglements on those bills, and that was somewhat of a lacking trait in this stimulus bill that just went out, where the American workers are getting a pittance of $500 or $1,200, and we don't even know when they're going to get that. Some people aren't going to get that until August. This is the state of the Democratic Party's race. Biden 1,217, Sanders 914. They're not too dramatically far, but because these are not given, delegates are not giving all to one particular candidate, the chances for Sanders gets more difficult from here. When you get into the various states, Wisconsin, 84 delegates, Alaska, 15 delegates, Wyoming, 14 delegates, Puerto Rico, 51 delegates, Ohio, 136 delegates, Georgia, 105. Where's another big one? New Jersey, 126. Pennsylvania, 186. New York, 274. So If Biden collapses, Sanders could legitimately win, but that requires Joe Biden to collapse. And despite the fact that Joe Biden has been accused of rape, the media for the most part has ignored that part. And despite Biden not being able to be coherent, give an answer, talk off the top of his head, he's been utterly worthless in regards to opposition to whatever Trump is doing in this crisis. And I suspect that's why Trump's ratings are what those ratings are. Whether or not those ratings can sustain themselves would have nothing to do with Joe Biden, because Joe Biden doesn't have the capacity to effectively be opposition to Trump. It would be entirely on Trump. If people start dying in mass in the way that they're dying now, if more and more people get affected, Trump will eventually get blamed for this, especially with 10 million people losing their jobs, and that number is only going to go higher. If we get 20, 30% unemployment in the United States, the president of the United States will take the blame for his ineffective response to this particular virus, which could allow a senile, partially dementia, sundowning man who is a dumber version of Hillary Clinton that offers nothing to stumble across the finish line, winning the presidency, staggering and muttering his way there. But that would be all on Trump, not anything that Joe Biden is doing. Joe Biden is just a corporeal being that can say words. Bernie Sanders has been the one that has been leading in regards to dealing with the coronavirus. His particular plans, his particular policies, it hasn't been just this flowery rhetoric. He has been talking about the country coming together, something that needs to be done, as opposed to ripping and fighting at each other for resources and whatnot. The way the state stole resources from another state, like that stuff. We, as Americans, need a unifying message to realize that we are better working together than we are in this kind of mad scramble at each other's throats, Resident Evil way of going about things, Mad Max way of going about things. Sanders is the guy that's leading on this issue. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support PayPal or Patreon. We will be having patron appreciation today, or contributor appreciation. That will be at 5 o'clock. Mrs. Thomas will join me. She's unconscious upstairs right now. So let's do the news. The coronavirus pandemic. Hundreds of thousands of people infected. That number is only going to get far worse. And mark my words, whatever this number is, we don't have the test kits to know, meaning this number is far, far higher than what it is. The number of deaths are probably higher than what they're showing here. But let's refresh to get the latest information on this. United States, epicenter, 331,286. New cases, 19,928 new cases. 9,476 deaths. 1,027 new deaths. Those are the current numbers. And again, I stress, it did not have to be that way. This was an act of policy, not an act of God. Pandemics happen. The government has all the resources in the world to respond to this pandemic. We control the amount of dollars that we have. We actually, believe it or not, make dollars. Those dollars can be marshaled to the needs of the population itself. It is a political choice on whether or not you're going to do that. It's a political choice on whether you're going to push corporations to build the supplies that we need. It's a political choice on whether or not you invest in making cheap ventilators that can be available to each and every one of these hospitals. It is a political choice on whether you fund emergency services and emergency needs, meaning having the gloves, having the mask, having the protective equipment in storage. So when something like this inevitably would happen, those things are available to the population. Those are political choices. Those are not acts of God. Trump knowing 3 months in advance that this was a pandemic and not responding to it, and not just that, downplaying it, having Republicans or having even Democrats go out and Republicans more so, telling people that there's nothing to see here, this is just the flu, everything is great, and then go down and sell their stocks because they knew what was coming. They knew how bad it was going to be. Biden has been an empty suit on this issue. This should be the point where they're screaming their heart out. In the terms of crises are opportunities to get shit done. What I mean by that is marshaling the crisis to your particular needs. Now, hopefully those needs are in the benefit of a good cause, meaning some kind of societal benefit, but oftentimes it's not. In 2008, when they did that bailout and they gave all that money to corporations and the oligarchs in the top 1%, and this epidemic, this crisis, where they give pennies of pennies, $1,200 to people in the United States while giving $4.5 trillion in capital to these various companies and whatnot, not to mention the bailouts. I guess my point is, what do you stand for? And whatever your ideological base is, in terms of crisis, that should be the time and the opportunity where what you stand for comes out. Meaning, if you do indeed believe that everybody should have health care, maybe this is the time where you scream that. Not acts about the exchanges being put, but actually Medicare for all. I hope you understand what I'm saying. Democrats stand for nothing. You tell it that much more clearly, because in the moment of a crisis where what you stand for should be, for the most part, on the agenda and marshaling that crisis to get your needs accomplished, especially if the crisis coincides with the things that you believe in, such as, health care universally for each and every person, well, this is the time to do it. Donald Trump comes out with Medicare for all coronavirus patients. The Democratic Party is pushing for exchanges. 10 million people have lost their jobs and lost their health care. And Joe Biden is still saying, I'm not for Medicare for all. I believe in the employer health care system. Those people have lost their jobs. Do you know how insane it is to tether whether or not a person gets health care to a fucking job? That job is impermanent. Meaning the health care is always impermanent and vulnerable to that person or that individual losing their position. If you indeed care about the human beings, if you indeed believe that human beings have value, then each and every person should be able to get health care. Period. And the way to do that is ensuring that Medicare for all covers it all. We pay for it in our taxes. We don't have money that we need to put up front. You could be the poorest person on the planet and you're still considered a human being and will get treatment like anybody else. That is an evolution of a society. That's where we can go. And if nothing else, the coronavirus that has a 9-point jump in Medicare for all, this will be the opportune time to make that point. You know who's making that point? Sanders. And oddly enough, coronavirus, Medicare for all coronavirus patients, in an odd partial way, Trump. The Democratic Party, we need the exchanges. We need the exchanges. The person who's leading on this is Sanders. This is Sanders on Bill Maher. Listen to this conversation.
This is exactly what I would do. The main point is that we have to prevent a breakdown in the entire system. That's how dangerous it is right now. It is much easier to maintain the system than to fix it after it is broken. What does that mean? From an economic point of view, it means that we tell every worker in America, you will continue to get your paycheck. We know you're not working. We know you're at home. You know your business that you're working for is not functioning. But guess what? We're going to do what the UK is doing, what Denmark is doing, what Norway is doing, what France is doing. You will continue to receive 100% of your paycheck. Number two, what we have got to do is guarantee that all people in America during the crisis get the health care they need without out-of-pocket expense. It is pretty crazy to say to people, as the last stimulus package did, that you can get your coronavirus test, government pays for that, but if you're sick and go to the hospital, you have to pay for that out of your own pocket. Number three, what we have to do is protect our healthcare system right now. We need to use the Defense Production Act to tell the private sector, who will be well compensated, they must produce the masks, the gowns, the gloves, the ventilators that the healthcare system requires.
Pragmatic, rational. Bernie Sanders is leading on this issue, but again, from the standpoint of mainstream media, he's been deprioritized because they've effectively accepted Joe Biden as the winner. It takes 1,990 delegates to win this race. Joe Biden and the Democratic Party are like, yeah, let's just call the rest off. He only has 1,200 delegates. Yes, he's in the lead, but that's not 1,900, meaning this race is still on. The notion that Joe Biden is going to say, I don't want to do any more debates is nonsense. And by the way, roles reverse, do you think Sanders would have ever said, I'm not going to do any more debates? Look, if we have an autopsy of Sanders, if he loses this thing, which if the momentum continues the way it is, he will, there needs to be an honest autopsy, the good and the bad. The reasons that he lost, the reasons, the missed opportunities, all of those things need to be put on the table in an analysis of what happened in this race. Sanders had all the name recognition in the world. He had a coherent group. He had an argument. All of that stuff was on point. The message, again, on point. So the question becomes, what was the thing? What was the defect? What was the failure in this particular campaign that allowed him to flame out? And we have to be extremely honest with that. I would say, and I would point to, the momentum you get from one state to the next means that you need to keep a certain degree of pressure in the states. Joe Biden is a default candidate, and people consider him to be most electable. At one point, when that electability started to drop, Joe Biden started to drop also. Meaning you can't let up on the notion of whether or not Joe Biden is electable. In fact, it has to be one of your main arguments. You can't be buddies. You have to make the case that this guy can't win. Have you seen him in the debates? Have you seen him in his speeches? Have you seen... Rail at him. You don't have to say he's incompetent. You just need to make the point that he cannot win. He doesn't have it in him to win. This goes in a few ways. Yes, that is somewhat of a brutal way to go after somebody, but what do you want to do? Is the objective is to win, or is the objective to be friends? This is not patty cakes. This is politics where you have very clear political objectives that you want to accomplish. I want ruthless devotion, fanatical devotion to accomplishing your objective where everything else is subordinate to you doing that. And if you need to, if there's anything in you that is bugged by that level of, like I said, the originals, always and forever, that level of devotion to family, I want to see that level of devotion to getting shit done. If it bothers you that he's your buddy, if it bothers you a little bit, if it plagues you in a moral sense that, oh, I feel bad going after Joe Biden in this way, rest that feeling against the 500,000 people a year that lose their health care or that go bankrupt because they don't have health care, the millions or thousands that die each year because they don't have health care, the fact that the climate is an existential threat to your grandkids and grandkids across the world because of the habitable space devastation that has taken place based on our particular capitalistic system. If you honestly believe that the debt that's on the backs of all these people is a burden to our particular society, not to mention the humans and individuals in a society, if you believe that these issues of war and we need to cut the military budget and we need to stop with the foreign wars and knocking over governments and losing and killing lives, if you believe that the policies of helping in the Bolivian coup and helping and trying to take down Venezuela, if you believe all that shit is wrong, then rest your morality there. Meaning, all of these things matter more than just your bad feelings about going after Joe Biden. How you feel cannot be a part of this process. I'm sorry, it just can't. That's for anybody going forward. Any lefty that's going forward that is trying to take power in the political process in the Democratic Party. Sanders could have fucking won this thing. Lay it right on the bat, the black vote. Now, the black vote is one of the most dedicated aspects of the Democratic Party, and it's not even the entirety of the black vote. It's the elderly black vote. It's just so happened they vote in higher numbers than the younger generation, despite the fact that the younger generation is the one that's going to be most adversely affected by the policies, by the people in office. But you can't blame them. I'm sorry. I know some people are like, what the fuck is wrong with African Americans and they're voting for Joe Biden? You cannot blame them. The elderly African American vote has been the most fanatical in its devotion to the Democratic Party. It's also the one that's taken advantage of the most in the Democratic Party because of that level of fanatical devotion. Over the past 40, 50 years, they've effectively seen a Democratic Party that has no capacity to do anything. There's no big things. Incrementalism is the call of the day. They're just moderately different than Republicans. And that's what they've seen over the last 40, 50 years. Al Gore, Bill Clinton, John Kerry, you can say Obama, and then you can go to Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden in this. But with the exception of Obama, who ran in this kind of hope and change, this expansive progressive rhetoric, but governed just like all of the other Democrats. Obama said himself, if years ago I would have been considered a Republican. Fair enough. I'm just making a point that all of those people are relatively the same, and all of those people relatively did nothing. There was no hope and change in that sense. There was no, new America, what benefited the workers. The workers in this particular process, their wages, their real wages, haven't budged. Obama gave 95% of the income gains to the top 1%. That was supposedly the most progressive president that we've ever had. Ludicrous. Utterly ludicrous. Now, if you're the African American who's somewhat older, you're barely paying attention to politics. What you know about the Democratic Party is just that they're not Republicans. And you see Bernie Sanders, who's saying all of the stuff that he wants to get accomplished. And everything in their history tells them that's not the way Democrats act. We can't get those things done. Democrats say they believe those things, and if they believe those things, they would have gotten those things accomplished. I mean, they just can't. Republicans stop them. And they hear Sanders saying that stuff, and there's a certain degree of disbelief that Sanders could get elected with that particular platform. Missing the point that all of those other Democrats that they consider to be normal Democrats lost. Hillary Clinton lost. John Kerry lost. Al Gore lost. All those people lost. Obama only won because he ran as a radical, regardless of the fact that he was not. I'm just making the point that from their perspective, what is normal to them is Joe Biden. That perspective, however, is enshrined based on the behavior and the actions of the Democratic Party over the course of their lifetime. They don't know any better. That's kind of my point. They're going by what they know of, just like we do. But in their particular case, what they consider to be normal is Joe Biden. What they consider to be risky and radical is Bernie Sanders, even if they agree with him on policy, which they did, because many of them, in all of these states, the majority of the people chose Medicare for all. How do you deal with that? If you're a lefty and you're running, you got to deal with that. Sanders never did. Sanders made an affirmative argument of this is what I want to do. And despite the fact that that argument wasn't working with elderly blacks, he continued to just stand and make the exact same argument over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. State after state after state, one barn burner speech after the next. He wins the first 3 states. He goes into South Carolina. South Carolina's African-American state. At one point, it looked like he was closing in on the polls, but then closer to it, he started to diverge. Now the catch becomes, how does Sanders get the black vote? And the answer to that is pretty straightforward. Joe Biden may be winning the black vote, but how do you put a knife into Joe Biden to bleed that vote out of Joe Biden? That's your question. If you can't necessarily win an affirmative argument, then you have to find something else in order to do. Continuing to do the exact same thing, if it's not making gains, is a pointless endeavor. The way you go after Joe Biden is the fact that Joe Biden had been lying about civil rights. Your goal in this is to tarnish Biden. The affirmative argument in that case may actually get a little bit more airplay if you put a knife in Joe Biden and he becomes fallible and a liar. This was true in Iowa and New Hampshire when it became clear Joe Biden was lying about Social Security. What happened to him? He collapsed. When it became clear that Elizabeth Warren was lying about Medicare for all, she collapsed. If Joe Biden is using something like the civil rights movement, which is effectively sacred to the African American community, and tokenizing it for his own political whims, that will not be tolerated. Now, a lot will ignore that. A lot would not. And if your name is Sanders, you don't need every African American to vote for you. You just need them to not vote for Joe Biden and to get a few of those numbers. You make a concerted effort in a campaign to show that Joe Biden was lying about the civil rights movement and showing yourself walking with King and being dragged away by the cops. And you make that an entire aspect of the political campaign, not starting in South Carolina, starting in Iowa, starting maybe even before that, running those videos, running those ads, making it sure, tarnishing Joe Biden's legacy and its attachment with the black community, making sure they understand he is a flagrant fucking liar who's absolutely so low that he's willing to use civil rights and lie about it as a way to get elected, to con black people at one church after the next. I, as an African American, wanted you to do that because Joe Biden shouldn't be able to get away with lying on that issue. Nina Turner, and to show how bad this was and how much of a fuck up this was from the standpoint of Sanders, that Nina Turner gets into an argument with the Joe Biden surrogate. The Joe Biden surrogate who's lying about civil rights, who said himself he's never been a part of it. He was just thinking about it. His surrogate gets on and tells Nina Turner she doesn't have the standing to invoke Martin Luther King. Just to be clear, Nina Turner's boss, the person she's surrogating for, Sanders, walked with King. Joe Biden, who's never been part of the civil rights movement, his surrogate has the nerve to say you don't have the standing to talk about King. Why? Because for the entirety of this race, Joe Biden has claimed the black vote as his own, and Sanders has never contested it. So from the optic standpoint, not from a reality standpoint, just from a narrative and optic standpoint, she can say Biden has the black vote. You don't have the standing to make this argument. And Nina Turner flipped the fuck out. Nina Turner should have flipped the fuck out. My very point in this is he hurt himself in this. The black vote Maybe not necessarily there in its entirety to take, but damn sure in higher measure, at the very least, to take it or rip it from Joe Biden. And understand the polling, Sanders was getting every other demographic. The black vote was somewhat specific because the black vote was so fanatically dedicated to the Democratic Party over the civil rights movements and whatnot. The younger demographic, not so much. My point is, that vote was there for the taking. You can't blame blacks for a job that was the candidate's. The candidate, in this case, just didn't do it. Anybody that is running behind Sanders, that is going to run to the left, needs to prioritize winning and getting shit accomplished. Use all of the pain, all of the misery, all of the hardship that is in the United States that you want to remedy as your impetus and as your reason for being. Yes, the ends in this case justifies the means, especially if the means are within the context and the bounds of law, but those means may make people mad at you. Fuck those people. You have shit to do, and how they feel is subordinate to what you need to get done. That's my only point, and that's my only advice. In the case of Sanders, especially in the context of the black vote, especially in the context of South Carolina, you could have buried Joe Biden there, but he didn't want to do it because he was buddies with Joe Biden. I told people on this channel that Sanders was going to win this primary. I apologize. My reasoning for saying that was entirely based on the notion that Bernie Sanders was going to do whatever he had to do to win. That's all. I thought he would make that play for the black vote. I thought he would be willing to put a knife in Joe Biden. I thought maybe not necessarily entirely make contrast with Elizabeth Warren, but at the very least understand that everybody in that race that is not named Sanders will be against Sanders. And he would run motivated by all of the hardship, all of the shit that's in the United States, motivated by the fact that lefties have been on the sidelines and radicals for the last 50, 60 years, and use that as impetus to do whatever was necessary with ruthless intent to get shit done. The population, in many respects, have been taught or disbelieve that intention marshaled by the government martial intention within the context of the government in order to get big things accomplished. They believe that that is relatively impossible because they haven't seen it in their lifetime. By the same token, they miss the point that they have seen it in their lifetime. They just think what they're seeing is normal. The radical intent in order to redistribute wealth from the bottom to the top has been taking place for the last 40, 50 years. This has been a class war that you have not been told has been taking place. The media, millionaires, paid by oligarchs, are effectively part and parcel to the same political edifice that is also paid by those oligarchs in order to push policy that is against your interests. This government, your system, how we are organized is not appointed by God. It's not appointed by anything. It's implicitly chosen by you because we accept what we have. This is going off the rails in regards to my point. So let's drag this back to the main point. Sanders is leading the way in regards to our response. Whatever comes behind Sanders needs to understand how he lost and why he lost. They also need to understand that he did have chances despite everything being lied against him. In the same way that Trump was able to win the Republican primary when every media space, every political space, even his own party was against him, he still was able to win. Meaning the chances are there, you just have to be willing to take the chances. Trump didn't care about anything else. Everything else was subordinate to winning, so that's the way he ran the race. Sanders has ideological guardrails that prevent him from doing the things that he needs to do to win, whereas his opponents have no such issues. And yet, he's the guy that has the best ideas in regards to policy and in regards to this pandemic. This is what Sanders is asking for. Addressing the employment crisis and provide immediate financial relief, keep workers on the payroll, just as the other countries have, including the UK, Norway, and Denmark. We must make sure that every worker in America continues to receive their paychecks during this crisis. Monthly direct payments of $2,000 to every person in the country. We must provide direct, reoccurring monthly payments to every person in the country, regardless of their income. Guarantee paid medical and sick leave to all workers. Anyone who is sick or who needs to stay at home should be able to stay at home during the emergency and receive their paycheck. Hazard pay for essential and frontline workers. Workers who are in the front lines of this crisis, including those who work in grocery stores, nurses, warehouse workers, paramedics, pharmacy workers, farm workers, food process workers, truck drivers, postal workers, delivery drivers, and janitors must be provided hazard pay, child care, and safe working conditions. Guarantee funding partly for the territories, tribes, and the DC. We must ensure funding partly for all health and economic coronavirus programs. Guarantee these programs to everyone in the country, regardless of their immigration status. We must guarantee health care for all, use Medicare for all to cover health payments and expenses, use the Defense Production Act to produce equipment and testing that we need. Immediately and forcefully use the Defense Production Act to direct the production of all personnel, protective equipment, ventilators, and other medical supplies that are needed. Safety standards for healthcare workers. OSHA must adopt a strong emergency standard to protect healthcare patients and other public during the crisis. Crack down aggressively on price gougers and hoarders, and use any measure necessary to secure the supplies. Make sure no one goes hungry. Increase SNAP benefits and expand SNAP and WIC. Expand the emergency food program. Expand Meals on Wheels in schools meal program. Provide emergency aid to states and cities. Direct fiscal aid to states and cities. The Federal Reserve must support states and municipalities. Suspend monthly payments. Suspend expenses like rent, mortgage payments, medical debt, and consumer debt collection for 4 months. Cancel all student loan payments for the duration of the crisis. Place an immediate moratorium on evictions, foreclosures, and utility shutoffs. You're in the middle of a pandemic. We need people to stay home, and we need to incentivize those people to stay home by providing the things that they need while they are at home. Again, rational actor. It's just a goddamn shame that that rational actor wasn't willing to go to the mat. Like, share, subscribe.